Okay, good evening, my Devi Dose people. How is everyone? Happy Saturday. Everyone's looking forward to watching some playoff football real soon. I've been away. We had some family stuff, and I had a vacation, so step away from recording for a few weeks. But we're back, man, and I'm gonna continue plowing through rookie profiles over the next week and to try to get all the running backs done this week as much as I can. I'm going to try to go 7 or 8 deep. Uh, there's some other guys I could potentially care about in this class, but um, I'm going to focus on the ones that I think are most likely to get day two capital or to be relevant despite not getting day two capital. Uh, Maybe hit some of the deeper cuts as we get closer to the draft if I have time. But today we're going to do uh, a guy that I don't know if he's a my guy for this, but it seems like I might be a little bit higher than consensus on him. I'm still a little bit back and forth in all my rankings. I was chatting with uh, Dave, the running back guru, on Twitter earlier today, and I think we're both on the same page that there is, one flawless prospect in this class, and it's Bijan, who I'm not going to bother to do a profile for right away because he's so obviously the RB1 to me. There's not a lot to be gleaned there. And then there's a bunch of guys with upside and real fantasy football potential, real NFL stud potential, but that'll have one or more significant flaws in their profile. So I think we're gonna, it's gonna be interesting in this draft cycle to see what the NFL scouts and GMs focus on. See what aspects of the profile they're looking for. Um, which ones they're not. And certainly so far from what we're seeing from Box and Draftniks, there's definitely a divergence from the Dynasty and Devi fantasy football rankings to actual NFL draft rankings, although we know that we're going to take it all with a grain of salt until it actually happens. So anyways, Sean Tucker, running back, Syracuse. Um, man, probably one of the guys you'll see more divided opinions on in this class. And, there's reasons for that for sure. 5'10, 205. So a little on the lighter side of workhorse, though, a lot of these guys will probably weigh in a little bit heavier at the combine, and some of them will certainly disappoint on the scales as well. We're already seeing that this week with Mo Ibrahim being 2 inches and 20 pounds lighter than he was listed at in Minnesota. So, I'm sure most of you guys have been around for a few cycles. This happens every single year. Some of these numbers shock us and have a drastic effect on our rankings and our expectations for these players. But right now, this is, it seems like Tucker's probably about this, about what he looks like on film. It's 5'10, 205, an okay size. You're talking about Aaron Jones, right, at that weight. Talking about Travis Etienne, right? Uh, Honestly, neither one of those is a terrible comp for what I've seen from Tucker. As a ceiling comp, as a high-end comp. I'm not saying he's going to play at that level in the NFL. I think it's a little bit early for anyone to make a sweeping proclamation like that about any of these guys. So career production for Tucker is phenomenal. He was the engine of that Syracuse offense, and this shows up in his stats. 590 carries, 3,192 yards, 27 rushing touchdowns. Those are really good numbers, man. I'm trying to find my average NFL stud. And again, I'm not a rocket scientist here, but comparing prospects to an average kind of composite of top 12 players at the position in the NFL, not current, but historical. My data set's about 12 years deep. So some things might have changed over the past decade, but we like to have a bigger data set rather than smaller. And that 3,200 career rushing yards is right on the nose for that average composite. 27 touchdowns is really close. My composite player had 32 career rushing touchdowns. And then one of my favorite aspects of Tucker's profile is his relatively prolific receiving. 63 career receptions isn't wild, but it's more than many of the backs in this class, and that compares to our composite profile, fairly well. Not quite the volume of receptions we'd like to see. Um, the receiving yards career number. Um, Sorry, my data is a little skewed. It's actually pretty close. So, it means while he's had not a wild number of receptions, he's been pretty efficient with them. And that kind of bears through to the rest of his profile as well. And then, 4 receiving touchdowns is also a good number for this class. Uh, yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at some aspects in my spreadsheet here that seem to be a little bit off. I'll have to deal with that later. Um, Great. So efficiency numbers. Efficiency isn't everything. Got to take it with a grain of salt. A lot of times, volume is more predictive for the running back position in general, which is one reason why I like Tucker. He carried the load, but his efficiencies, it's not wild, but they're decent numbers. 5.71 yards per touch. The top 12 figure I was using is 6.5. So slightly under, but nothing terrible. 2.08 yards per carry over team. That's an interesting metric. I'll just say all these metrics are, for efficiency particularly, interesting data points. If you're single data point scouting, you might want to reconsider that. None of these are panacea. If they were, then gosh, we wouldn't have to do any of this, right? We would just be looking at an ordered list of players by the magic stat. But white yards per carry over team certainly is an interesting thing to look at. I think you can filter some high risk players with this metric if it's very low. Tucker's is not. Tucker's is a phenomenal number. The average top 12 figure was 1.77, so Tucker's substantially above that. And we can look at it and say, well, how good were the players on his team? I think that's one thing you always have to do with this specific data point. And I think he was clearly the best runner on his team for the vast majority of his career. I know my friend Noah Brown, Noah More Parties, has thrown some stats up from this past season, 2022, cast Tucker in significantly less favorable light, which might have to do with having better players on his team. There was a scheme change this year, which I think is significant for him. That's something we'll talk about more when we talk about film with Tucker. From what I can see, he's significantly better as a zone runner than a gap runner, and that kind of bears through in the data as well. And they made him run a lot of gap this year. So we are thinking that might have an effect on his poorer 22 efficiency numbers because they were significantly down from his career averages. 2.39 yards created. That's the amount in this data set of yardage that the back gained in addition to what his line blocked him. That's a decent number. It's not crazy. My composite number is 2.94. So we're in the ballpark. We're not world beating. 0.003 rushing yards over expected. If you want to know more about over expected stats, we can have a Discord on that later. Shoot me a DM. Generally, they're useful to compare guys, and this is not one of his stronger figures. Basically, he's getting what's expected here, and again, we're not going to single data point scout here. There's successful guys in the NFL with poorer numbers than this. David Montgomery, a lower number than this. He was negative. Cam Akers, well, we're not as high on him as most people aren't as high on him as they were as he was coming in. Certainly was successful towards the end of the season. He had a negative figure on this. And there's some guys that haven't been stellar in the NFL with great numbers on this. Darrell Henderson, 1.15. But it's certainly an interesting data point, So this is what he got over the expected rushing yards for each situation down and distance. So, not a bad data point, but certainly not a great one either. 2.01 adjusted yards per team pass attempt, or adjusted yards per team play. Sorry. This is actually a really good figure. My composite was 1.56. So, this is describing the volume of his production in relation to the number of plays that the team called. Again, it's a market share metric as much as it is a production metric or an efficiency metric. Kind of ties those things together. But man, that's a great number for Tucker. He was the engine of this offense. He carried the load, and he did so successfully throughout his career. 0.16 EPA per play. Again, that's a little bit lower. It's about half of what my composite top 12 figure came out to. 0.30 was the composite number. So it's neither terrible nor great. There's certainly plenty of guys that are successful with those kind of numbers. Again, it's David Montgomery, it's Cam Akers, but there's also plenty of guys that weren't successful in that range too. But Miles Sanders is 0.136. So, you'd like to see this data point be a higher number, but it's not a death sentence either. We kind of see that a lot of these, right? So some of the market share stuff, Tucker really is on the higher end of the scale, but some of these other, the rushing yards over expected, the EPA per play, he's not killing it, but he's not dead in the water either. It's still within a range that aren't making him off my draft board. His production market share numbers are phenomenal. 35% dominator is a quite good figure. How does that compare? That's over the average, from a composite significantly. And 50% rushing yards market share. That's an awesome number. That's a best season number. Actually, it looks like I used averages for Tucker's. So, rushing yards, market share average. Rushing yards, market share average. Yeah, no, that is a best number, and that's over the best season rushing yards market share number from a composite player substantially. And then this 14% market share of receptions figure. This is one of the things that gets me excited about Tucker, right? That's substantially over the average for my average stud here that I'm using. 14% as opposed to about 9%. Let me make sure I'm quoting that correctly. 14% to about 9.8. So that's a nice data point, The elusive stats, which I do like, I include some of these in my model. 66 missed forced tackles. It's a good number. That's over the average. That's a volume stat to some degree, but you have to be breaking the tackles as well. Maybe I should start throwing in missed forced tackles per attempt in here. It'd be pretty easy to do. 4.11 yak per attempt. That's a pretty average number. It's like right there with my average stud. My average stud was 4.17. Which is a great number, And then 1.22 for Tucker's best, or his max, yards per route run. Interestingly, that's a little bit lower than the stud yards per route run. But some of these things don't necessarily translate to the NFL. So again, we can't look at this and say, oh, that's what he's going to do at the next level. But it does say something about his efficiency with the routes he ran, right? Did he not get the ball that often when he ran a route? Was he not that efficient with the reception? Well, I think that we can see he was, because his receiving yards were very high relative to the number of receptions he had. Um, sometimes these can be scheme things, but overall, Tucker's he's got a nice data profile. So one of the data sets I look at in this prospecting, and one of the things that I do my model based off of, the data set for guys from 2019 to 2023, right? So I get his peers, that he played with some levels, and my model has him as the 21st best prospect in that 3-year time period. And I mean, there's some huge whiffs in my model, but for the most part, there are guys that got drafted, and mostly, the guys that are higher than him on that list have been very successful. The bad ones are like, Kennedy Brooks, who was dead in the water with draft capital, but was super productive at Oklahoma, very efficient. Spiller, kind of dead for me after the draft capital. Trey Sermon and Zach Moss are the guys on that list above him that got draft capital and whiffed. Darrell Henderson's there. He's a little bit questionable. For the most part, everyone else on that list above him has done well in the league. So that gives me some hope for Tucker. And this is, the model's back tested. It's database, doing linear regressions, doing p-tests to identify what to include. There's a lot to like about Tucker's profile. We'll sum up more about my thoughts with him after we do the film, which I'm going to take a break, get the film loaded up, and then we will kick that off immediately after this.